Marketer of the day, number 480. Build a sustainable business. Operate strategically, correct your mistakes, and create consistent systems with Josh Patrick. Hey everyone, we're so glad that you're listening to our conversation today. We're talking with Mr. Josh Patrick, and he's going to talk to us about how to make more money by making more mistakes. And Josh is a serial entrepreneur, and he's the founder of The Sustainable Business and the Stage 2 Planning Group. And he has a new book called Sustainable, a Fable About Creating a Personal and Economically Sustainable Business. And so we're going to have a really fun conversation. So how are things today, Josh?
Great. Thanks so much for having me on your program.
Glad to be talking to you. So, what are you all about and what makes you stand out?
Well, that's a pretty good question. I've been doing this sort of stuff for a little bit over 40 years. So I've essentially like to bill myself as being obsessed with what it takes for a privately held business to become sustainable, personally and economically sustainable, although environmentally sustainable is sometimes part of that deal. And many business owners have created businesses that are successful for them, but they're not transferable and nobody else would really want to own them after they're done with it. So my purpose is to help these folks think about their business and say, gee, is that the right thing for me to do, or do I want to create a sustainable business?
Okay, and so just to make sure that I understand what you're talking about, how by sustainable business, and when you said transferable, so you mean where if we built a business that maybe doesn't depend on us, so that if we want to, delegate everything we could, or if we want to sell it off, we could. Is that correct or on the right track?
You're on the right track. There's 5 pieces of sustainability in a business from my point of view. And what you just mentioned is what I call operational relevance. And that is certainly one of the 5. It may be the most important of the 5. If your business depends on you, then there is no way that business is ever going to be transferable, nor is there any way that business will last past you. Now, having said that, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right. You have job security that way, right? So to speak?
Well, you're going to have job security either way. If you build a business that's transferable and you decide to keep the business, which most people do when they actually get around to doing that, then it's not a big, they can keep their job securities for as long as they want. The difference is if you create a sustainable business, you're not involved in the day-to-day operations anymore. You're involved strategically way more than you're involved tactically. And for the vast, vast, vast majority of privately held business owners, it's the tactical stuff that people get stuck at. In my experience, most business owners are pretty good at thinking strategically. They're bad at acting strategically for a variety of reasons.
Okay, so can you clarify and maybe unpack that a little bit for what does that mean, like thinking versus acting strategically?
Sure. Let's say I own a plumbing company and I've got 5 employees and I spend 80% of my time out in the field or trying to get new customers. And I spend 15% of my time in the office paying bills and taking care of administrative tasks. While I'm driving around, I'm probably thinking strategically about what I might do with my business to make it better. The problem with that is I might think about it, but because I have no capacity or time to do those stuff, I just end up thinking about it. Let's take another example. Let's go to a plumbing company that now has 25 employees, and I'm again the owner of that company, and I'm spending about 15% of my time out in the field, 15% of my time in the office doing administrative work. That means I now have 70% of my time free, which means I can now act strategically about who are the right customers for us to work on, what's the right methodology for us to deliver our service, are we doing the right things to make our business move forward, and after I decide what we're going to do, I now have the time and the energy to actually implement some of this stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so time to think, time to take new actions, and not just running around putting out fires.
Right. Typically, most private business owners go through the life where everything in their life is urgent and important, which means there's, things going wrong all over the place, and all they do is put out fires. But what if instead you as a private business owner manage to work on things where you're doing things that are important but not urgent, meaning that if it's done today or tomorrow or the next day, the world won't come to an end, but you're working on important things that are not urgent about having to be done. Now you're likely to take more time, do a better job planning, be more thorough, and not just trying to do the last thing to get somebody off your back.
Sounds like a great place to be.
It is a great place to be. It's a wonderful place to be. In my first business, I was there. It was a whole lot of fun. I had 90 employees. The only stuff I ever did were things I was really, really good at, because I had people in our company who did literally everything I wasn't good at. Now I'm running a much smaller business, so I have to do things I'm not very good at. And frankly, it's certainly fun to do this, but it was more fun when I had 90 employees.
So how did you build up those 90 employees? How did you go from where it was just you to, to building this huge beast?
Well, I was in the vending and food service business, started off with 1.5 employees. About 6 months after I went in business, my largest competitor went bankrupt and we bought their assets. So that brought me from 1.5 employees to 25 employees overnight. And then we did a bunch of other acquisitions along the way, and we grew the business organically. So between all those things, I ended up with 90 employees. And to make that business work, I had to learn how to delegate. And that's the biggest problem that people have that keeps them from growing a business and becoming operationally irrelevant. They're just not very good at delegating. They don't trust and they don't have a tolerance for mistakes. Those are the two things that keep people from being a great delegator.
And I can definitely, unfortunately, empathize and relate to that common problem of being probably afraid of delegating, like, having to put that trust in someone else's hands. And probably there's an ego factor in there, like thinking that, no one else can do it better than me, or maybe like it would take a while to train someone to do that. And then probably a little bit of a control freak sort of mentality of, wanting it to be done exactly the way that I would have done it. So do you have some advice along those lines? Any tips to set us straight and change our way of thinking?
I have lots of tips along that way.
Cool. Fantastic.
So the first thing is, let's take a look at mistakes, because mistakes are where people get stuck a lot of times. I don't want to delegate because I can't afford to have somebody else make mistakes. Well, the truth is you're making mistakes all the time. And the other thing about mistakes, which most people get wrong, is they put all mistakes in the same bucket. There are mistakes that your business can't make, because if you do make them, they could put you out of business. And that's maybe 1% or 2% of the things that could go wrong in your business. But 95, 98% of the time when something goes wrong, it's just something went wrong and you can correct it and fix it. In fact, if you really want to have a loyal customer, have something go wrong, fix it for them, they'll become loyal to you for life. I have a story I tell all the time about this. When I used to play a lot of tennis, and this was probably, pretty close to 30 years ago. I had this local tennis and ski shop that would string my rackets. So I brought my rackets in, all three of them, to get restrung. And they said they'll have it back the next afternoon at 2:00. So I went back the next afternoon at 2:00, and they hadn't even started on it. So I was annoyed, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. So I said, okay, when are you going to have this thing done? They promised it to me the next morning at 10 a.m. So I went back the next morning at 10 a.m. And guess what? They still hadn't started on my racket. So I had a core meltdown. I started screaming and yelling and calling these folks all sorts of names. I was completely out of control. It wasn't the right thing for me to do, but they had promised me twice that they were going to have something done for me, and it wasn't done. Well, I left in a huff, and I said, well, that's the last time I'm ever doing business with these guys. Went back to my office, and an hour and a half later, the owner of the company walks into my office with my 3 tennis rackets strung, gave them to me free, and really apologized for inconveniencing me. Now, it went from them probably losing me as a customer for life to me being a customer for life. And as a result, I probably spent, $30,000 or $40,000 with the ski shop over the years since that happened. So they took basically a bad mistake, and it was a mistake. It wasn't like the world was coming to an end. And frankly, if they lost me as a customer, the world wouldn't have come to an end either because they had lots of other customers. But they made me loyal for life. I've always talked them up as being a great company, and I've talked about them in seminars for 30 years since this happened. So they basically took a mistake they made, they corrected it, and as a result, they made me a loyal customer for life.
I love it. That's fantastic perspective right there. And so what you're saying is that maybe mistakes aren't something to be avoided, but something to be corrected. Like, we shouldn't be afraid. We shouldn't hesitate to delegate because of the mistakes they might make. We should delegate and know that some percentage of mistakes will happen, but it's not the end of the world. We can correct them.
Right. And the thing here, there's two things about the only mistake that you should never make is a mistake you don't learn something from. So when somebody makes a mistake, including yourself, like, here's the question you should ask. You should ask, what did I learn? And if you don't come up with an answer, you have to stay with that question until you do come up with an answer, because if you don't know what you learned, I can guarantee you one thing: you're going to make that mistake again. So making a mistake is not necessarily bad. Correcting the mistake, fixing the systems, which is another one of the 5 pieces of sustainability, is that all great systems are great businesses, all have great systems. And you want great systems for 2 reasons. One is your employees want to know what they have to do for excellence. And 2, your customers want to know that they have a consistent product they can depend upon. And neither of those things happens unless you have great systems. So when you have a mistake made, you ask, what did I learn? You look to your system to fix it so your employees know what they do and your customers know what they can expect.
And I imagine also that with this, like, now once you have others do the tasks and things that need to be done, once you're that person that's spending 70% of your time on the strategy, because you're not always doing all those day-to-day tasks now, and you have time to think about the strategy, then you can kind of have those gears turn and think about ways to improve the system to correct the mistakes. And maybe if you were too much in the business before, you wouldn't have had that time to do that thinking, right?
That's absolutely correct. And the truth is, businesses where the CEO, smaller privately held businesses, where the owner is actually able to act strategically, will be way more successful than businesses where the owner doesn't.
Well, fantastic. And so something that comes to mind as we're talking here is, all this internet stuff has really taken off, and you've been in business for decades, and I'm sure seen all kinds of things. So do you think that in this day and age, do you see a lot of people like missing out on something, or like any kind of like missed opportunities, or things that maybe people are doing wrong despite all this technology and things like that?
Well, technology doesn't make you do anything right. It just makes you do it faster.
Fair enough.
I mean, if you have crummy systems and you've got a crummy business and crummy things you're doing, and you've automated all that stuff, you're just doing this crummy stuff faster than you were before. Doesn't mean you're making it any better.
On an even bigger scale, maybe even, right?
Oh, it could be a bigger scale, but most likely not, because of a bigger scale, you'd run out of money.
Run out of money faster, right? Right, and it makes me think of like there was some, I don't know, there's something I read like years and years ago when I was a kid that was saying like, if you had like a pencil and a paper, like you have the same pencil and paper as, say, like Stephen King or like Nicholas Sparks or someone, right? It's like you have this tool, but you can have the fanciest tool, but if you don't know how to use it, then what's the point?
Right. So the point is, I mean, I tell people this all the time, and when you're going to automate something, first do it manually to make sure it works right. And also do small experiments. Don't do this gigantic plan where you're going to change everything in your business and you're going to go from being, let's say you're a bookstore, although a bookstore is a bad example, but let's pretend we're a bookstore and we want to put our bookstore online. Well, if your bookstore is not working well offline before it goes online, I'll guarantee it will be a complete disaster
Right.
because online systems are much more complicated than doing things with a pencil and a paper. And when you start doing this stuff, you want to do one piece at a time and building one piece at a time. I mean, if you look at Amazon, they didn't become the everything store overnight. It started off as a bookstore, and then they added CDs, and then they added something else. And before you knew it, they became what they are today. But they didn't start off trying to be all things to all people. For most of us who are in business, we are trying to be way too broad in who we serve. I'm a huge fan. I call myself a nicheaholic, meaning that I want to have a very, very small group of people who I serve. I serve them better than anybody else in the world, and nobody can compete with me in my space. But the rest of the world, I have to say, I'm not very good at, and I'm going to pass. Now, the problem with that is for most privately held business owners is they don't know the word no, and they don't have the ability to say no. They think that anybody who can write them a check is somebody they need to say yes to. And I'm going to say you're wasting time, money, and effort by doing that, because if you're doing one-offs, you have to learn everything about that particular customer every time you serve them. But if in fact you serve the same type of customer over and over and over and over again, you become an expert at their problems, their issues, what they need to do, and you don't have to think about what you do because you already know how to do it. So you're not reinventing the wheel every time a new person walks in the door. So your cost to deliver your service is much less. The quality of your service is much higher. And as a result, you can even charge more money for what you're doing because you're seen in that niche as an expert.
Right. So all kinds of benefits. And as you're explaining that, what came to mind was I saw a friend of mine posted something on Facebook the other day where I guess the Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street guy, had some kind of analogy that like when you have your business, it's like you're panning for gold in a stream, and there's the stream, and you're trying to catch like the little bits of gold flakes. You're not trying to turn the water into gold. That would be impossible, but trying to serve everything to everyone would be like, trying to transform something into something else, which doesn't work. But instead we're just looking to pick up those really focused pieces on getting just the right customers, and we provide just the right service. So like this makes a lot of sense, and especially in terms of not being spread super thin and not trying to serve everything to everyone, and not replicating your mistakes over and over again by trying to get all these things in place. This is making a lot of sense here.
Yeah, it does. It does.
So great. So you have this book called Sustainable, and you said that that there are these multiple areas. Is that right? Multiple areas of sustainability?
There's 5. Yes.
All right. So, and we've covered some of them, but can you just like lay out like what are the 5?
Sure. Easily. I'm glad to. You start off with values and mission. If you don't run a values-led business, meaning that you know what your values are, you put clarifying statements around those values so everybody in your organization understands what they are, everyone makes up their own truth about what your business is about. And too many private business owners don't do that. So the direction for the business is unclear. When you run a values-led business, then the direction becomes very clear. From those values, you make a mission statement. That mission statement should be 10 words or less and can be answered with a yes or no. Now, you integrate both those to everything in your business. That's step 1. Step 2 is you need to make yourself operationally irrelevant, meaning, and we've already talked about that, but you want to be out of the day-to-day operations of your business. Step 3 is you want a business that has recurring revenue so that when you wake up on January 1st, you know you're going to have a certain amount of business that comes into your company. Now, the problem with that is most businesses do not naturally have a recurring revenue stream. So if that happens to be you, the way you fix that is you put together a sales process that creates customers on a systematic and predictable manner. Step 4 is you systematize your business so your employees know what to do and your customers know what to expect, which we've already covered. And step 5 is really a result. It's not something that you would do, and that's having enough profitability to make your business become economically viable. And there's 4 areas of profit. One is lifestyle for the owner of the business. Number 2 is having enough money put into an emergency fund, because all businesses are going to have rocky times where they need to tap into cash that may not be available from the bank. And if you don't have an excess cash account, you're not going to have cash, and that's why lots of businesses go out of business. The third thing about profitability is to have money put aside for growth, because no bank is going to fund 100% of your growth. If you have a really good business and it's really predictable and it's pretty big, a bank might give you 80% of the money. They're not going to give you 100%. And most of the time, a bank won't give you more than 50% of the money you need. And then finally, there's enough money to fund a retirement plan adequately so you can afford to leave your business when you want to. Now, we have a whole program around those 4 things called the Financial Freedom Project. But those are the 4 things that are results that do when you run a business that is economically sustainable. And economically sustainable means you have to hit all 4 areas of those profits. Almost no businesses can fund all 4 of those areas, at least of the business I run. They do exist, but they're sort of rare. So those are the 5 areas of sustainability.
Okay, well, great. And I mean, I love this this sort of the structure, this action plan, so to speak, that you have laid out here, because it seems like it works with just about any business, and even whatever trends change over time is irrelevant. Like this is like an evergreen kind of thing. So that way we can become economically viable with our lifestyle, that emergency money, the growth money, and the retirement plan, and set up the values and mission, then become operationally irrelevant, then have that recurring revenue with a sales process of some kind, systematize, and then get to that final and 5th step about become economically viable. So this is all very thoughtful, and this helps me especially because I think that a lot of people out there, including me, are maybe have chugged along as far as we've gotten, but need to maybe build a real business and have some of these pieces in place. And so, as we're winding down here, I'm really curious, Mr. Josh, about, in all your years of building your business and all your ups and downs, I'm sure that at some point you've had some sort of doubts or insecurities, or you're wondering, is there even a future here? So do you have any interesting story like that? Maybe like a story of kind of failure and then some triumph?
Well, I don't. I've had zillions of failures. I've had way more failures than I've ever had triumphs. I mean, one of the things that
how about like a really scary one that was scary in the moment?
Well, I had a salmonella breakout in my company. I had a commissary manager who had decided he wanted to save me some money. So he went out, and we were making lots of things with ground beef, and he decided he was going to use ground turkey instead. And he handled, the person making the product was shepherd's pie and chili, and I forgot what else it was, but it was shepherd's pie and chili definitely that they made with this stuff. And the problem with that is that it was bad. And I got a phone call saying, gee, someone at our office got sick on your food. And I'm sitting here saying, well, that couldn't happen because we'd never had that happen before. And then about 2 hours later, I got another call, and then another call, and then another call. I said, well, we got a problem here. So we had done disaster planning before this stuff ever happened. We went through and we thought about what are the 7 or 8 things in our business that if they happen, would have the potential for us to put us out of business. That was one of the 7 or 8 things that we had planned for. So we knew exactly what we were going to do and how we were going to do it, how we were going to control the damage, and how we were going to take care of the people who had gotten sick. Now, I don't know if you know anything about food service companies and salmonella, but that is typically a death knell for the company. The interesting thing that happened, because we knew exactly what we were going to do, we told the truth, we went out and made sure everyone who got sick was taken care of, we took responsibility for it, we didn't lose one account over that because of the way we handled it. So one of the things I like to see people do, and this is kind of an advanced thing, it's called scenario planning. where you sit down and say, okay, what are scenarios that are good? What are scenarios that are bad in your company? If it's good, how are we going to take advantage of it? If it's bad, how are we going to manage it? And we went through and we had done that stuff. And one of the things that happened came true. So by following the plan that we had made and put in place and doing all the things we needed to do, we ended up keeping all those customers in force. Nobody left us, and the company was still in existence 15 years later.
Wow, fantastic. So a slightly worse problem than a tennis racket not restrung, but this is all this that story makes it all connect for me because it for me it goes back to the having that freed up time to think ahead and plan for things. And once again, if you're just flying by the seat of your pants at that time and not outsourcing enough or not thinking in terms of systems enough, then you wouldn't have had that extra time to plan out those scenarios. And as you were like explaining that whole idea of like having the 7 or 8 things or those 7 or 8 scenarios that you plan for, I mean, you're making me even think about, in terms of like, I'm a computer guy. So I think like, okay, well, what if the merchant account went away, or what if the website went away, or what if the emails didn't get delivered? Things that like I'm too afraid to think about, but now you're telling me that maybe I should think about that. So if the worst happens, I won't be having to make a quick decision. The decision's already been made because I planned for it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're sitting there, like let's take my salmonella issue. If we took my salmonella issue, and I had not thought about what we needed to do and plan for it before it happened, I would have had to spend time trying to figure out what to do next. And I can guarantee you I would have done the wrong thing.
Right, because you're reacting and not being proactive about things. Yeah,
Right.
and I mean, and yeah, and you've been saying here that mistakes will happen. It's okay to make mistakes. And just look at Samsung had phones blowing up. Apple just had the battery issue with the iPhone. So I mean, even the biggest companies in the world make mistakes. I mean, Amazon messes up with me sometimes. Like I sometimes won't get my package. So like nothing's 100% perfect. But if we know that going in and we have some of these important things in place, then we can still have a business that survives, which is more important than being too afraid to make any kind of mistakes. So I mean, lots of great advice here, lots of things to chew on and think about, and I want to make sure that everyone gets all the resources that they need to get after listening to our great conversation today. So can you tell us about any kind of websites or books or anything of yours that you think people should know about today?
Sure. My book, Sustainable of Fable, and by the way, it's a novel about a business family that is dysfunctional and the things they need to do to become sustainable along the way, will be available on Amazon on February 6th. It's called Sustainable, a Fable About Creating a Personally and Economically Sustainable Business. If you want to find me, you can do that at jpatrick@stage2planning.com. That's the number 2. I have 3 websites. One is for my book, which is sustainablethebook.com, www.sustainablethebook.com. Our consulting business is www.sustainablebusiness.co. And our financial planning business is www.stage2planning.com. Our sustainable business and Stage 2 Planning have podcasts, videos, blog posts, all sorts of stuff that people might be interested in. And it's all built around how to make your life better and how to create a sustainable business.
Awesome. I love it. And I like your interesting stories here and giving us the things that we need to know, but it's still in simple terms. It's not any like business speak or anything like that. And I love the idea of your Fable book to teach us what we need to know and maybe sneak in what we need to know, but also deliver it in an entertaining way so that way we're not put to sleep. So thanks for that. I appreciate that. And just to make sure that everyone has all those resources again. First, I want to say the book is Sustainable, a Fable. The email address is jpatrick@stage2planning.com. We have sustainablethebook.com, sustainable.co, and stage2planning.com. Did I get all those right?
Well, sustainablebusiness.co.
Oh, sorry, sustainablebusiness.co. All right. So there's something for everyone depending on what you're looking to do in your business, whether you're looking for a quick read or lots of interesting resources. So make sure that you go to that so that way you don't get caught with your pants down, as they say, right? That way you don't get caught by surprise if the worst happens, and that way you don't hold yourself back and let some of those mental blocks get in the way when it comes to building your business and getting to your greatness. So I really appreciate you, Josh, for stopping by and for telling us all these great stories and using your experience and all the things that you've learned to help others and tell us what we need to know. And I really appreciate your advice, and I appreciate you.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Thanks for the time today.
Thank you for listening to Marketer of the Day. Subscribe and listen to other shows at marketeroftheday.com/episodes.